It is the hour of 11:30, and I'd like to call the special Kane County Board meeting to order. The date is January 14th, 2022. Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Ellen. Bates.
Bates present.
Berman.
Berman here.
Brown. Brown. Davis. Davis. Ford. Mr. Frost.
Fry's here.
Gums.
Gums here.
Iqbal.
Iqbal present.
Kenyon. Caius.
Caius present.
Kopi.
Kopi's present.
You. Leonard.
Leonard here.
Lewis.
Lewis here.
Martin.
Martin present.
Molina.
Molina present.
Sanchez.
Sanchez here.
Shepro.
Shepro present.
Silva.
Silva's here.
Strathman.
Strathman here.
Sturgis. Tepe. Wallace.
Here.
And Warnicki.
Present.
Okay, you definitely have a quorum.
Allen present.
Thank you. Did I miss anybody else? Okay, you have a quorum.
Ellen, I'm very happy that you're here. Thank you. And Mr. Brown is at the dentist. He'll be joining us once he gets done under the drill. So he'll be coming shortly. Martin, could you please lead us in the pledge?
Well, just like if you're shopping and grumpy for like a few weeks.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I believe we do have some public comment. We had a little ad hoc sheet that we put out. Oh, we have an official sheet. Doug, excuse me, I can't quite read your handwriting for your last name. Is it Doug Wallach? Werlich, please.
Absolutely. All right. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for having this public forum.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Jeff, my fault. Is it to topic or is it off topic? It depends on how much time you'll have.
I think the topic is the voting on the precinct maps.
Very good, very good.
That's
So
it.
then you will
All right.
have 5 minutes.
So,
You'll have 5 minutes.
Okay, I don't need 5 minutes. I'm a Geneva resident. I'm an attorney in Geneva. I have been here for more than 20 years. I'm currently the vice chair of the Geneva Township Republican Central Committee. And I'm here to object to the proposed map of the Geneva precincts. Specifically, I'm currently the PC for precinct 11. Precinct 11 now is largely precinct 10, but 10 is much larger than 11. My understanding of the reason for doing the remapping of the precincts was to actually make them more manageable and to reduce the number of registered voters in a precinct. This is actually appears to be the opposite. I mean, I'm not sure where the numbers came from, and I'm probably somebody could say that I'm wrong, but it's not just the geography of the new 10 that is quite massive. Looks like from the airport, the Page Airport, all the way, west of the river. Unfortunately, and this would not be a reason to vote against it. Unfortunately, the chair of Geneva, the secretary of Geneva Township, and myself, so 3 on the executive committee, are all in this new precinct. I understand that that's in and of itself is no basis to object. Vern was very polite and courteous. I got here early today and he was explaining some of the reasons behind this is try to get some of the boundaries to correspond with other electoral boundaries like Geneva Township, Batavia Township. And so now the city of Batavia has, an area that's in Geneva Township. So that's part of precinct 10. So without speaking to all the other precincts, I would just suggest that before we rush to this, it seems like this has been a rushed process, that we slow down. We look at things like the new precinct 10 in Geneva, divide it, perhaps divide it at the river, but divide it instead of rushing and saying, well, this is the best we can do given the time allotted, and we're just going to vote for it the way it is. I think that's not a good solution to say, we'll kick the can down the road and deal with this later. So I respectfully request that the county board reject the proposed map, at least, look at it. There'll probably be others that will suggest that there's some other deficiencies, but specifically the new 10, I think, should be divided. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you for your comments.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
ask the speaker for a clarification.
sure, absolutely. We can
I'm
allow
sorry,
that.
which, you mentioned one specific precinct. Which one was it?
The new proposed precinct 10 in Geneva.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, but you're talking about prompts for like 10.
Okay, can we mute? Thank you. Ms. Rippon? Susan? And once again, ma'am, if it's to topic, you have 5 minutes. Off topic, it's 3.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Madam Chairman and the board. I'm pleased to be here this morning. I am the secretary of Geneva 8, and Doug and I are colleagues. And the reason I'm here is to tell you a little bit about my concerns about the map regarding the whole process. Our precinct 10 now is quite an anomaly, I think, and probably could have been thought out better. But I wanted to go down the list of things that I gave some of you. I'm sorry, I didn't have enough to hand out, but maybe you can share. And I just searched for this information. Unfortunately, I didn't or wasn't aware that there were maps, and I found them accidentally a couple days ago on the Public Service Committee, which I was surprised because I thought our townships should be made aware of what was happening and maybe have some input. But this meeting wasn't posted as well today, and I understand that might have been an error, but it was very difficult to get to people to have them come and comment when there's no posting about a meeting. As Doug said, our own precinct, or my own precinct 8, was stretched to include precinct 11 across the river, high on the bluffs, and way down south in Batavia, south of Fabian Parkway. In Geneva now, we are going to have more precincts, over 1,200, than we had before. One is 1,600, which I understand you will address maybe at a later date, but I don't understand how you could split it and start over with new precinct numbers in June or July. So that's a question I have of how these over-the-top precincts now would be addressed at a later date. In Geneva Township, we also lost precinct committeemen due to the remapping, of course, because now several of them are primarying each other in the new precincts. All of this just causes me to ask you these questions. If the law was known on November 15th that this process had to be done, why wasn't it started till much later on December 28th from my information? That doesn't give you a lot of time or to find the right people to do the job. And I would like an answer to that. I think there might be some answers to that. Was there any review of the draft by the committee itself, who that oversaw the process? Or were just a few people drawing maps who really didn't understand it? And I would like to know who decided to consolidate the districts rather than divide them. Is there any purpose in that kind of consolidation? Because what it did was make more work for a lot of people, have to find more workers in 2 weeks, 8 weeks until it's time to submit petitions. And, this is just kind of goofy. 1,200 or more people in a precinct. I used to have 500. I was working my precinct pretty well. But 1,200 with an expanse out into the hinterlands to West Chicago is kind of unusual and hard. So I ask you to maybe answer that question about the purpose of consolidation versus division, which is, I thought, the intent of the legislature. And then there are the trickle-down effects of this decision-making that you probably don't know about. For precinct committeemen and us that go to door, we don't know now where our door-to-doors are because we don't have a good voter list. We don't have a database, we don't have anything, and that won't be available for quite a while. So it really puts a damper on our efforts to get out the vote. And I would like to remind you, this is not a partisan issue. This affects everybody, both parties, everybody who does any political work on behalf of the public. And lastly, as a board, I'm feeling that the clerk's office really had responsibility for this process and something failed there. And I wish that we could have a better or more experienced office in place. We have been worried about it for a while, as you may know, that there were anomalies in the election process last fall. But that's a different subject. I would just like to ask you now to consider voting no on this map. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. We have a couple of things we're going to be deciding today, and I'd like to change the order of the agenda. I'd like to bring it because I know that the first item of approving the ordinance to establish the boundaries for our election precincts is going to be what I assume may be a interesting conversation. So I'd like to take care of something that I'm sure we can all agree upon, and I'm hoping we'll all agree upon, is the appointment of our new Executive Director of Human Resources. So with that, I'd like to get a motion and a second to approve resolution number 22-37.
So moved, Surges. Wallace, second.
We should all just, is there any discussion on this at all? Yes.
Madam Chair, I can't think of in my professional background, I can't think of a more awkward position to be in than to be
Excuse me
asked,
for a minute. Ms. Liberola, could you please come up to the podium?
than to be asked to fill in temporarily as an interim director, then have to interview for the position because you have interest in it, and maintain a certain decorum and professionalism without ever once making anybody feel uncomfortable. Yet Ms. Labrillo has successfully done that head and shoulders, and I cannot express enough my appreciation for the work she does, for the leadership of her team, and for the way she handled this situation. And I am wholeheartedly in support of Jamie.
Thank you. And if I may add, with the utmost grace and professionalism
Absolutely.
in a very difficult transition. So is there any other discussion on this? Would you like to say a few words before we take the vote?
Just want to say thank you very much. This has been an excellent opportunity and I greatly appreciate your consideration. I feel very honored to be here.
Good, good. Clerk, please call the roll.
Allen,
Allen, I.
Bates,
Bates, aye.
Berman. Brown, have you arrived? Davis, you there? Ford,
Ford, yes.
Praz,
Raz, yes.
Gums,
Gums, yes.
Iqbal,
Iqbal, yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Caius,
Caius, yes.
Copy,
Copy, yes.
Leonard,
Leonard, yes.
Lewis,
Lewis, yes.
Martin,
Martin, yes.
Molina,
Molina, yes.
Sanchez,
Sanchez, yes.
Shepro,
Shepro, yes.
Silva,
Silva, yes.
Strathman,
Strathman, yes.
Burgess, Tepe, Wallace,
Yes.
and Warnicki.
Yes.
That passes.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to continuing to working with you all. Thank you.
Very good. Before I move the next resolution, I'd like to just have a very brief comment. I don't know if any of you have ever had the opportunity to take a look and really take a look at Guy Belavere's statue that honors our veterans that's standing outside. I would suggest one day that you take a walk out there. And I was reflecting on it today as I was actually walking my dog. And I noticed the flag up high, the soldier holding the flag in victory. And you walk around and you see the memorial of all the men and women from Kane County who paid the ultimate sacrifice for what we're about to vote today, the right to vote. On Monday, we will be celebrating Martin Luther King Day. Now, not only did that great man choose to fight hard, and many people joined him for not only equality, but also the ability to vote, to cast a precious vote. Now, we have come a long way this past year. We've made many great decisions. We've been able to pass a redrawing of your district with full approval from all of you. And now we're at the last leg of that journey. We have to do the precincts. Now, this has been quick, it's been efficient, it's been done effectively, but it's been done without having the ability to have that length of time to be able to get all the input that we may have wanted and so desired. That input will be able to come in the future, but by state law, we have to have this decided upon by today. Now, if I can remind you that one of the reasons why this was delayed and not done on the 14th or the 15th of November was that some of our legislative maps had not been passed yet. They were being contested. And those maps were not decided until right before the Christmas holidays. So on the 28th of December, staff giving up their holiday season, they went to work to redraw our precinct maps. And so this is where we are today. The precincts, I hope you will approve this. I ask for your approval. And we're going to be talking a bit at length about why this is so critically important. We have to give the time for our election board to be able to put in all the data. We have to give the time and the ability for our precinct committee people to go out and walk their precincts with the appropriate information. And the longer this is delayed, the longer it's going to take, through no fault of our own. This is literally no fault of our own. The election this year is different because of the census and also because of COVID. So I'm going back to my original statement on the reflection of that noble statue that's out there. Guy Bellavere is a veteran. He was a resident of St. Charles, and you may be more familiar with his work with Potawatomi statue in St. Charles. The greatness of what happened here in Kane County, the actual founding of Kane County, is represented in both of those works. And today you're going to be making a substantive vote, a vote that should have taken annually, but had been delayed for a long period of time, 2 decades. So it's a big shift, it's a big change. So please vote as you feel is appropriate, as you feel what's best for the upcoming election, what's best for the candidates who are trying to run effectively, and what's best for Kane County. And so with that, may I have a motion and a second to discuss and potentially approve ordinance number 22-36? Mr. Tepe?
Hey, Mike, please. Mike.
Was not on, pardon me. Madam Chair, Tepe here. I'd like to move for ordinance number 22-36, approving the establishment of boundaries of election precincts pursuant to 10 ILCS 5/11-2 following redistricting.
Yes.
Berman, I'd like to second.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, I know there's going to be a lot of discussion on this. So if I can have your grace, before we get into discussion, I'd like to be able to have Roger present the background information on this and how we got to this point. Because I think that'll be very important for all of you to hear, and then we'll open it up to discussion. So Roger, please.
Okay. Good morning. This is Roger Fonstock with the Kane County IT Department. So Blair, I'm going to be sharing a couple screens from here to process this. So give me 1 second. So I'm going to start off by sharing a little bit of background. Some of you have seen this. If you weren't able to join us for the special Public Service Committee meeting, I'm just going to touch on a few slides that talk about kind of the process. Again, we began, December 28th with the Madam Chair and the Public Service Committee Chair and State's Attorney's Office, GIS, and the IT Department and the County Clerk's Office. So you can tell we have a lot of players involved starting December 28th. But prior to that, we also were working on what information we have from the county board district maps, which were not approved by the county board until November 30th. So even those were 15 days after the November 15th. But we'll talk about that, and also the fact that the other maps at the state level were in litigation. So there's some issues there that were delaying us, but you are correct that December 28th was kind of our real workshop days getting started. So what we're going to look at is obviously the statute, which was the precincts being divided or split, but there's also this component of I think I went to one slide too far, the alignment of the precincts with the new districts. So that was one of the first priorities, was from the statute. And I think Mr. Shepro had said that's always existed, and I believe that's true. That's something that we're required to do after the decennial census. After they redraw the districts, we get them to conform to the precincts, or the precincts conform to the districts, so that the precincts are not representing any two legislative, two congressional, two county board districts, two Illinois representatives. So they're all appropriately representing one of those. The next part was dealing with dividing or splitting precincts to the 1,200 registered voters, which I know there's been a lot of talk about what's practicable, and we're trying to determine what is practicable about splitting precincts and the potential at the decennial census of merging or taking some small precincts. For us, it was less than 500 voters, but how do you handle those as far as potentially merging them into some other existing precinct? The the last piece was kind of the deadline of 60 days after the November 15th. And that was the statutory part that we were informed about from State's Attorney Mosser. So in getting into the approach to the work, there was that initial meeting in December, and that started a work group, which we called the precinct team or the precinct project team. That consisted of elections, GIS, IT department, State's Attorney's Office. And then we had committee chairman Vern Tepe was also engaged in that. A lot of the work is obviously between the elections department and the GIS department. They're the ones that are doing the handiwork. So the objective was simply to comply with the statutes and reconcile the precinct lines, get them to conform to the congressional, legislative, county board boundaries. And we referred to that as precinct alignment. And that's outside of, oops, I skipped a couple slides. Outside of the splitting concept, the last piece was whether or not we could merge those smaller ones. So we set this out into 3 parts, and I think these are important to understand. This is an old slide deck, so these are done actually, even though they say in progress. I just thought this would be a good place to start. So we started out with part 1, which was all about alignment. And we spent the first 3 or 4 days just aligning precinct lines with jurisdictional boundaries. We didn't work on splitting anything. It was just trying to follow the statute from the decennial census and the redistricting to align boundaries. That was part 1. Let's see how far we can get. We have very specific deadline of January 14th. And knowing that we need to notice this meeting 2 days in advance of the meeting, which it was noticed through the county website after public service on Tuesday. This was put out on the website with the supporting documentation. But in order to get that ready, that means we have to be done by January 11th. So from December 28th to January 11th is the time frame that we had, and we scheduled with the Chairman Tepe 3 special public service committee meetings to work through special public service committee meetings to share this information. It's happening fast. Set them up. We did a meeting, I think it was every Tuesday and Friday, up until the last public service meeting. So again, we're working on alignment. Now, once we get through with the alignment, the question is, do we have time to address splits? And the initial conversation was we have 4 really large precincts, over 2,000 voters that we need to split. Obviously, we're going to look at those first. So we broke it down into what precincts are over 3,000, what precincts are over 2,000, what precincts are over 100 or 1,200. And then lastly, which precincts are smaller than 500. And we're working through the problem in that order. So that's kind of the mode of operation for people to understand what's going on. And again, keep in mind that you're looking at this as you go through 291 precincts, 24 board districts, all the different districts. The last piece is kind of the results of making these changes. How does this information go from a line on a map into voter registration and into the elections department and then disseminated out to the public? And what does that do for a import-export process with the systems involved? So we also had another third part of this, which was working on those things. And I call those kind of the byproduct or the after effect of making a change. And we've been putting some effort into that, which we'll talk about as well. So Mr. Tepe had offered these important dates. We were kind of keeping those as a highlight and kind of a watermark for us to look at, when do they start doing petitions? When do they start their filing period? When does early voting start? When does primary happen? So you're looking at all of these and trying to not only draw the lines, but look at how long will it take us to implement in elections the resultant effect of making this change. So I think that's all going on. So I don't want to oversimplify anything. This is what we were doing, and it's how we ended up getting to the ultimate ordinance. And this is one of the work schedules, and this is what I was referring to when we had the meeting on the 11th with special public service meeting to have the public service meeting review and approve and move to the county board today's special county board meeting. So I hope that that kind of gives you a little bit of a view of where this came from over the last couple of weeks, and the timeline and the deadlines and the things that we were engaged in. So that is the information from that side of it. So today you have a ordinance and you had an exhibit A. The ordinance is clearly defining the part 1 alignment, the part 2, the splitting of some precincts. And again, we did not get to split all of the precincts below 1,200. That was not what we deemed practicable. And when I say that, all I'm saying is that in the amount of time we had, we took the largest precincts we could down to about 1,600 and split those. And I know there's been comments that we didn't reduce the number of precincts over 1,200, that we actually in fact have more over 1,200 by splitting, but trying to get them down as far as we could to as close to 1,200, you're obviously not able to do them all. We would have had to split another 100 plus precincts. And we simply, again, you're dealing with time and effort, and how much time do you have to do these things? So the discussion with the state's attorney's office was when can we practicably do the splits after we make these changes? And the answer was, sometime after June next year, we can address splitting the remainder of the precincts. And excuse me, the one suggestion was that, the Public Service Committee take the responsibility to review this timely annually through their committee as a process to do the splitting. And we're working on that with Committee Chairman Tepe. I think that's an important process. We can't revisit this after, not working on splits for years and then try to do it much like we did in a fast, large fashion. So that's all background information again. So with that, you have the ordinance that's in front of you today, which again was related to Exhibit A. At the time we were promoting the ordinance at Public Service, the Special Public Service Committee meeting on Tuesday, we were working on part 3, which is all the parallel testing of the data to export it from GIS into the clerk's office election information management system. While doing that, we're looking at configuration files, and one of our GIS database administrators is identifying what I would describe as precincts that have some line adjustments or lines that need to be modified because they're cutting across 2 townships. And we were looking at the township form of government and the precincts being within a township. We talked with elections and they said, yes, our election management system is set up such that the precincts are within a township. And the question was, well, how many of these do we have? Can we make the precincts conform to the township boundaries as well for the simplification of the election management system? And also we believe that generally speaking, that's the understanding of township and precinct committeemen, that we've historically had them precincts within a township. So we began looking at that and identified all of the precinct lines that did not match township boundaries. And we were looking at the effort level to make those changes from Tuesday to yesterday. What would it take to have the township and precinct lines be congruent or be the same? So we identified those. There are a number of them throughout the county. I believe the number was 105 touches that we had to look at. I will tell you that it did not affect more than 50 voters. They were lines that were drawn adjacent to a township line or near a township line. And sometimes it involves moving the precinct line to the township line, which is less than 50 feet. And I'll show you some examples of that. But you have ordinance before you, and you have Exhibit A. And then there's an Exhibit B that we sent out and are going to show you today. And that Exhibit B is simply showing you the precinct and township lines that we wanted to align before we import and export into the voter registration system. So I have some handouts that if anybody wanted them, I think it would be helpful if you have those perhaps in front of you as we talk about the Exhibit B. So there was a amended ordinance sent out with an Exhibit B. And at this time, I don't know if it's appropriate to look at a motion, to amend the current ordinance with the new ordinance and Exhibit B, or consideration for the current ordinance with Exhibit A. There's some other details about Exhibit B that we'd like to show you a presentation on as well. It kind of shows you what the effect is of making these changes, which are very minor. I mean, there's literally almost no change.
At this point, I would like to have you hand those out so that people can see what the detail is. And I'd also, I know we have representatives here from the clerk's office. I think it's very important for them to discuss, and Mr. Dugan, if you wouldn't mind, to discuss the importance of townships and also the importance of precinct committee people.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mrs. Chairman.
Excuse me, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Do you need a amendment to the resolution to begin this discussion?
I will refer that to the state's attorney. I don't believe so, since we're still under discussion.
But you're under discussion under the original resolution. This is modifying that resolution?
I believe that the discussion is pertinent to both, so you could do it either way.
Madam
let's
Chair
begin.
Bates, please.
Yes, Ms. Bates.
Is what you are handing out right now the same thing that we received in an email from Jane Tallett?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The clerk's office is very grateful that the county board and the committees of the county board have consulted with the clerk about this process. Whereas it is a function of the county board to change the boundaries. The clerk's office has to administer the election, and under this compressed schedule, we requested this Exhibit B change because we realized that there were some very minor areas where the townships, a precinct would be split between two townships. Our tradition has always been within the election process to maintain precincts within only one township. That's how the political parties have structured their precinct committeemen. Also, there regularly are resolutions and referendums by townships that have to be voted on, by township voters. And although we could handle that with the ballot style, the state's attorney is correct that it is not a mandate of section 11-2 of the election code that the township boundaries, that a precinct may only be within one township. However, we requested the change that Roger is describing because our electronic management software is pinned to, the precincts are pinned to their townships. So we are concerned about the compressed schedule of this next primary and the very quick general election that will follow it. And we were concerned that our election management software would have to be reprogrammed to allow those 50 people to be coded in individually. But it also, in the future, we were hoping to have the GIS data automatically imported into the election management software. And, we feel that the tradition of the county is important. And also, within the time, we want to try to get the walk lists and the election data available to the candidates and the campaigns as soon as possible. And it would delay that. It's estimated 2 weeks to have our election management software reprogrammed, for that purpose, which is why the clerk's office requested this Exhibit B modification to the proposed resolution.
Okay.
Roger, is there anything else?
If you want me to go through Exhibit B to explain what is in that that's different from the original ordinance, I'd be happy to do that.
Okay,
or-
I think we should table that because that's very germane to the resolution or the amendment to our ordinance.
Yes.
So if I may, is there a motion and a second to move Exhibit B, Amendment B to?
Madam Chair, Tepe here. I'd like to put forth a motion to modify Resolution 22-36 to allow for the incorporation of approximately 105 minor line adjustments to align the individual lines within the townships and to correct the minor discrepancies that have occurred based upon the detailed drawing of the data.
Is there a second?
Berman second.
Herman. Once again, if we can just have Roger present the reason for this, and then we'll open it up to discussion.
Okay. So again, going back to the ordinance, so what you have on the screen and what we handed out looks like much the same ordinance, and I have it on the screen. You should be able to see it online. One of the things that we were looking at again was the alignment of these precincts within a township. So what you'll see in the new ordinance is as you browse down through it, there will be a new whereas before the now therefore be it resolved. And this is addressing the alignment of the precincts with the township boundaries. So that whereas is just kind of the general description, and it's the no precinct is situated in more than one township. So then we have a therefore be it ordained that you're going to adopt the new precincts with Exhibit A, and then also, the Exhibit B, which would amend Exhibit A. So what that means to all of you, if you look at Exhibit B, you'll see, and I can try to make this a little bit larger. You'll see a list of precincts and the boundary line that we were trying to get the Aurora 1 precinct to match. So we were simply moving, or let's say nudging the line over a few feet or 50 feet to have it match the township lines. And we did this for all of these precincts to get them to align. And it looks like a lot of information, and it looks like a lot of change. These are minor changes to the lines. And how do I know that they're minor changes? I can show those to you in a table, which I handed out in here. But this table shows you the precinct sizes from Exhibit A. Actually, Blair, I gotta share that again. Hang on.
Roger, if I can ask Sturgis.
Sure.
I have 3 pieces of paper here, none of which have dates on them. Is this like the before and after?
No, they're all the same. So one is Exhibit A and one's Exhibit B. The Exhibit B is labeled at the top.
It's this one with the 2 columns.
And then there's a column where it shows Exhibit A and Exhibit B in the columns. You'll see.
Does everybody see which one? It clearly says, it begins with Exhibit A, Exhibit B on the top, Aurora 1. And then Aurora 1, there's a comparison and contrast.
So
Dates really would help.
it's today.
Right at the
Today.
bottom, just a little date.
It's today. It's today.
I'll just put today on it. That'll help.
So going back to, the exhibits, if you look at Exhibit B, this is, let's pull it up here, trying to get this to grab. Exhibit B. So this is the Exhibit B, right? That everybody had handed out. It has a title at the top and says Exhibit B and the ordinance name.
Everybody see that one? So we're all clear with
The one on
everybody's
screen,
paperwork?
just so you're aware.
Very small print.
Yeah. Okay, so what we did was we aligned the precincts with the township lines, and those are all listed for you. And again, I was saying, you know, they're very small changes, and I'm going to show you how we determine that. This is actually the precinct population in Exhibit A and Exhibit B side by side, and I'll try to expand that a little bit for you. But what you'll see in this table is the calculated difference between Exhibit A and Exhibit B. So the first one, Aurora 1, you'll simply see that we went from 906 to 912, and the net change was 6 people that were affected by realigning the precinct to the township. 6 people. All the ones that say 0 affected no people whatsoever. So I'm going to sort these from the largest to the smallest, and you're going to see that we only affected the population, and those were ads. So you have roughly, you know, I think 10 or 11 that added some population. And then, and the greatest add was 12 people for 3 of them. And then as you go down to the bottom, you'll see the ones that were subtractions. And the subtractions were also, you know, similar. The largest subtraction was in Aurora 35. We had 19 voters affected by the alignment of the precinct to the township. That's all this is doing. All the ones in the middle, which were zeros, affected no voters whatsoever. There's no voters involved. These were lines that are drawn out in fields sometimes out in Rutland, that the line's just not following the township line. And if anything ever, you know, we're in there, then that would result in the voter being moved. So I'm just highlighting all these going through to show you the zeros. So in turn, we had 272 precincts that had no voter change whatsoever. So 272, that means 20 precincts had a voter change plus or minus 19. So that's the net change of Exhibit B. It's a lot of work to do this, but at the same time, I think the elections department, because of the voter registration system and GIS, they felt that it was important to do this. We brought this to the state's attorney's office and said, you know, Tuesday, it's getting, you know, the 11th hour. We know it's late. We don't want to make a change, but we think making this minor adjustment in the precinct and township lines will make the voter registration system that much easier to configure. So that's what we were trying to do. I know that, you know, proposing, you know, an amendment or another exhibit at this point is rare, unusual. I think it has a very minimal impact. It doesn't address all the other issues that you're talking about with whether you went far enough with splits or precinct committeemen, all that. It's strictly dealing with the precinct and the township boundaries. So we have another example that I'd like to share with you. So you should see this online. This is a brief presentation. It's only 6 slides, but so these are some of the factors. We're working with the data files and the maps and the elections. It's early parallel testing. We're testing the data to see how it goes into the election department. I would say that Mr. Chairman from the special from Public Service Committee, we had talked to him about, we're going to start testing the second we have data, because we don't want to find out, you know, a week or 2 weeks from now that the configuration, we have configuration issues. So we started testing immediately, and one of them noticed this anomaly or the difference. So we started dealing with it 2 days ago, yesterday, spent a lot of time on this. And with elections and GIS, made the alignments of the precincts for Exhibit B. So you have that now. You know that it only affects 20 precincts, and it's less than 19 voters that are involved in any of those 20. There are 105 minor line adjustments, And it doesn't substantially change any precinct. Most adjustments affected no voters. And we simply felt it was better to correct or to address this now than to try and address it when we get to configuring the voter registration system. That was our motivation. So this is an example. So for those of you that are curious what this looks like, if you look at the picture, this is a drawing of before and after, and I wish it was a little bit larger, but this is Sugar Grove 6 and Aurora 35. The left side of this is an image that is side-by-side line. The blue line on here is the township line, and I'll try to make it a little bit larger so you can see it better. So the blue line is the township line. The red line is a county board district line. And then the precinct line is following the red line. So you see the curve in the precinct line, and this is the township line. So in this drawing, the voters between these two lines are technically in Sugar Grove Township, but they're in Aurora precinct. So that is the challenge in voter registration. These people that are dots are actually voters. They're in Sugar Grove Township, but they're in an Aurora 35 precinct. So what we did on the right-hand side is we straightened the line to snap it. Just the precinct line is snapped to the township line. There's still, by the way, a county board district line that runs out here. So these people will still vote for the same county board district, but their precinct line will match the township line. And that's simply what we were trying to do, is just make that little match. So this is one of the examples in Sugar Grove 6. Sugar Grove 6 would have had, maybe 10 voters that moved in from Aurora 35. That would have been one change. If you look at the next page, this is Batavia 21 and Aurora 42. This one is like 2 voters. You can see where the lines don't match. And the blue line again is a township line for Batavia and Aurora. The red line is the precinct line. And what we were trying to do is align the precinct line with the blue line. Again, doesn't affect the county board district that's approved, doesn't affect any of the legislative or congressional. Only thing it would do would be fix the precinct to be within the township. On the right-hand side after, you can see the line adjustment, and both the lines are overlapping and congruent. So I did 3 of these just to show you kind of what it looks like. And we did this for all 105. There's a similar reconciliation, and I actually have the images for each one if you want to see them all. But the before and after for this one is a go back up for a second. It's Blackberry Precinct 2, Sugar Grove Precinct 6, and Sugar Grove 12. And again, you have the before and after. This is the blue line is the township line, the red line is the precinct line, and after is just making them congruent. And again, it doesn't affect any of the election jurisdictions. It's just a precinct being within a township. So those are the changes that we made. I think it's important that you're perfectly clear or transparent about the type of change that Exhibit B makes. The thing that we thought was important was that it helps elections manage the voter registration, the ballot styles, and the configuration of the voter registration system to have the precincts within a township. And I think that we've had a lot of people express that historically the precincts have always been in their township. So those are the things that Exhibit B addresses. You have a copy of Exhibit B. Exhibit B, you have a copy of, and you have the new ordinance, which is the revised ordinance that mentions Exhibit B on the second page. So those are the 2 key documents. The ordinance on the second page of the ordinance mentions Exhibit B, and it's a little bit longer than the first ordinance. And then there's also Exhibit B at the top. It says Exhibit B, and it's a table of the precinct population. And I'd be happy to try and add in, add any more information if you have questions.
So let's begin discussion. Ms. Winnicki.
Thank you,
Copy,
Madam
please.
Chair.
Mr. Copey, hold on, Ms. Winnicki, and then Mr. Copey, you're next.
I guess my question is, the impetus for doing all of this was to keep the voter population 1,200 or below. But then I look at Campton 1, it's 1,600, Campton 11. Actually, Dundee has two precincts that are over 1,500 in population, or a population of voters, I should say. So I'm just curious why, I know it was brought up earlier by Sue, it was what we were told, it was more splitting precincts, large precincts to make them more manageable and bring them to 1,200 voters or below.
So, Madam Chair,
Yeah, one of the reasons why this occurred is the additional cost that may be, I'm going to use the word incurred again, by the clerk's office and ultimately by the county board. The more precincts we have, and it was an estimate, if we just split, there'd be approximately 100 additional precincts. And with those 100 additional precincts, we'd have to have 100 additional polling places, 100 additional machines, 100 or 200, how many, 300 maybe, election judges, and I'm unsure of that count. But everything grows in proportion, as does the budget to support all of that. So that was the original thought of how we maintain budget, and also to be able to be fair and equitable to all of our voters, to make sure that the precincts are, for them, for their perspective, manageable.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, that's very understandable. Thank you. And I did want to say thank you to Roger for all the work you've put into this, and our IT department, another one of our great departments. So thank you.
They're very effective.
Madam Chair.
Mr. I think, Mr. Copey. Mr. Copey?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I understand, and this point had eluded me, probably simply because I have not been involved with the process, and but that's a whole different story. The axiom of the math associated with the division is it comes down to the voter. Now, I always understand this is maybe a populist idea that it would be, the axiom would be the population. So why is that important? I'm going to reach out here as typical. Brace yourself. The point is that recently we had an anomaly in the elections. Let's call it coronavirus. And things changed radically. And then the mail ballot situation was imposed, nearly immediately. And there was a huge response. Now, the voters that we are using in the axiom are those that came out to use the mail ballot system, and it is confirmed that the Democratic Party and their affiliate voter was the predominant voter with the mail-in ballot. So, therefore, if you design a precinct according to the voter, according to the anomaly of the coronavirus and the mail ballot, you are effectively consolidating Democrat votes. Correct me if I'm wrong. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Ms. Nerman is going to come up to talk about that.
It is important to note that Section 11-2 of the Election Code requires the county to draw the precinct boundaries based upon and aiming for 1,200 registered voters. So that is the data that was used by the IT and GIS departments when they were creating the precinct boundaries. It's 1,200 registered voters. That's what the statute requires.
Is there anybody else? Yes, Mr. Martin.
This may turn into a series of questions.
We'll roll up our sleeves.
Okay. I'm going to ask questions based upon the way I've understood the process to date. And if I'm wrong on any of my assumptions, I'd like to
Sure.
told that too.
Your microphone.
Hello? Okay, I'm going to ask my questions premised upon my understanding of the process to date. And if I'm wrong on process, then just tell me so I can head in the right direction. But this conversation began because we have some precincts that were absolutely distorted. We always hear about the one in Rutland Township that had 7,000 people. And so we have an obvious necessity to cure problems in those gross areas. We also have a goal of attaining 1,200 people, but, and I'm not faulting anybody. I compliment the effort that's been taken to date, but I don't want to even use the word but. I compliment the efforts that have been taken to date. But when it is so compressed, then questions begin to arise almost after the vote because people sit and finally have a chance to catch their breath and look at it. And I'd like to be ideal and say that the whole world sees things in advance, but they don't necessarily do it. My first question is there a way of addressing the gross issues that we have with, and I don't know how many townships is it? We always hear about the 7,000 in Rutland. How many are that extreme within the county?
You mean 16 townships, 292 precincts? There's 102 that are over 1,200 right now.
Well, is there a way legally of accommodating the crazy numbers and then having a more deliberative manner of approaching the rest of this? Because my final question is going to be, because it's probably a good example of other stuff that other precinct committeemen can look at. How do we address the questions as were raised by Sue Dixon here relative to the total geographic change? And there may very well be a way of addressing it. As I say, I'm not asking this in any accusatory sense, but it's difficult when the process is this condensed to be able to address issues. And my question is there a legal way of dealing with whatever the number is of the extreme cases, and then putting us and dealing with technicalities and then moving forward? Because if today's a drop dead date in an absolute sense, we don't have a lot of options, because if we have to do it, we have to do it. But I want to be told that, and I guess my question is there a manner by which we could be more deliberative with this, give people an opportunity to say, well, why is my precinct so much different than it used to be? There may very well be good answers that are based upon all of the stuff we've heard today, and I'm not suggesting that they aren't, but it's a little awkward in the context of an election that's coming up to make a change that we may be correcting or modifying in another year. So do we have to, what is the minimum we have to do today to comply with the law? And I'm asking that also because if we've done this, if we've been wrong for decades without a penalty, then what's wrong with one more year? And I know, everybody's eyebrows will go up, but we've been, if you've been doing it wrong long enough without penalty,
Is it
then
right?
why
Yeah.
not, then why not take another year and do it properly?
All right, Ms. Neerman.
Unfortunately, the way the section 11-2 of the election code is worded, you only get one shot every 10 years to adjust the precinct boundaries to match up with the newly drawn legislative districts. So in this case, the statute historically has been worded such that, you do it as soon as you can, as practicable after the decennial census. The legislature this fall inserted into that statute a 60-day requirement so that once the law became effective on November 15th, you only have 60 days to complete this process. As mentioned previously, the county board adopted its map on November 30th. The state legislative map was resolved somewhere between Christmas and New Year's. I can't remember the exact day. So we are in a bind under the legislation that was passed this fall to get this done by today to adjust the boundaries. Now, the statute further provides that you can divide precincts in subsequent years. You just can't adjust the outer boundaries of them. So you can indeed address these issues of the larger precincts that really maybe would be better to be smaller. You can do that and you need to do it on an annual basis. The county has not been dividing precincts on an annual basis for some reason. I don't know the reason, but it just has not been done for the last at least 8 to 10 years, it appears.
I think 20 was the
Okay.
number.
20 years. So that is the issue that you are dealing with today. So our recommendation would be to indeed adjust the boundaries in accordance with the statutory requirements to match up with the new legislative boundaries, and then proceed on an annual basis to divide to ensure that you have, no more than 1,200 in each precinct.
Does that
Well,
answer your
maybe
question?
my question's turning into a comment, but it's when we haven't done this for so long, anything that we do that adequately represents the issue is going to make some significant changes in a lot of things because nothing has changed gradually as it perhaps should have. And my question, which I guess has been answered, is rather than enabling us to proceed in a fashion that gives us an opportunity to address issues in a concrete way, what we're saying today, and I understand the time frame. I will repeat myself. I know the difficulties that we've had that were handed us, that we had nothing to do with on arriving at what the basis for our maps were going to be and everything else. And I understand the context, and I agree with the context of how much it costs to run elections if we just willy-nilly start dividing up precincts and creating new obligations for polling places and all their support. It's just, I've never in my life felt comfortable being doing what I was told to do. And well, but I think I'm being told to do this. I think I'm being said, this is the last day. We've done everything we could. This is a whole heck of a lot away distance from being perfect. But what happens if we vote no? What happens if we said no today? What is our consequence?
I would like perhaps John or Brian, can you come up and talk about what'll happen?
The clerk's office will deal with whatever map the county promulgates. I think the county has a statutory duty to address it every decennial. What we would suggest, however, is that there's so many methods of voting now that don't result in 1,600 people showing up at a precinct on voting day. You know, there's the mail-in, the vote by mail, there's early voting, there's grace period voting, you know, we have vote centers now. So I believe that the 1,600 registered voters is not a difficult size precinct to administer for the clerk's office as the election authority. 1,200 is not a difficult precinct to administer either. We would make sure that we have communicated to the board that to add another 100 precincts would cost us about $2.5 million worth of equipment to equip each of the 102 precincts. There also would be an additional election day payroll of about $75,000 for election judges. There'd be additional cost to recruit and train those additional election judges. So we feel that expense would be unnecessary because we feel that the existing infrastructure and capital equipment of the clerk's office as election authority is adequate to manage the 291 precincts and to effectively and efficiently administer elections on election day.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I believe right now the current precinct map stands at 292 precincts. Is that correct?
Yes, it's 292.
If we did a calculation that if each precinct was rectified to 1,200 registered voters, we'd have 265 precincts. But the problem on doing that, you know, is that the other overlay districts and the various other requirements of the election code that, you know, each precinct has to have only one county board, one legislative, et cetera, you know, and also our preference that each, because of our software requirements, that each precinct have only one township, that we would necessarily have more than 265 precincts if we went to a uniform 1,200 across the board. And one of the things I also think it's appropriate for us to comment on, because we do appreciate that we were consulted about the process and allowed to participate in it with Roger and the GIS. There was not one scintilla of partisanship in the process. There was no gerrymandering. There was nobody trying to get some sort of political advantage with the way the maps were drawn. They were drawn strictly to try to get as low a count in each precinct as could be done practicably within the budget of our capital costs and our personnel costs for administering the elections. And we would compliment the county board for that leadership.
Yes.
Madam Chair, Surges,
I think
the two words that,
Hold on just a second.
oh, John, I'm
I
sorry.
think Michelle is going to answer my second.
Oh,
I apologize.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I think this is what Mr. Martin might be getting at. Under the election code, section Article 9, section 29-12, disregard of election code. Except with respect to Article 9 of this code, any person who knowingly does any act prohibited by or declared unlawful by, or B, fails to do any act required by this code shall, unless a different punishment is prescribed by this code, be guilty of a Class A misdemeanor. This could be read broadly to apply to any act that the county board refuses to do. In addition, with respect to legal arguments, John, I think, Mr. Martin, I think that you can make potentially equal protection arguments or some other sort of arguments along those lines as well. You could be subjected to liability for that. The county could.
Shepro, may I ask the state's attorney a question about what she just said?
Yes, please. I want to make sure that Mr. Martin is done.
Time being, anyway.
Yes, but hold, if you would give the floor, Mr. Surges, to respond to this question.
No, yes, by all means.
Okay, very good. Yes, please. Yes, Mr. Shepro, please.
Ms. Neerman, how many prosecutions are you aware of for violating the precinct size ever? Wouldn't it be
I do
zero?
not have any information on that. I don't think that there's reported cases on that, Mr. Sheparo. My job is simply to tell you what the statute is.
I understand. Now, the statute, as you read it, I believe said that anybody who does any act contrary to the provisions of the election code could be guilty of a Class A misdemeanor.
Any act prohibited by or declared unlawful by or fails to do any act required by this code.
Okay.
Unless a different punishment is prescribed by this code, be guilty of a Class A misdemeanor.
So the amendment that we are dealing with requires the board to divide precincts so that no precinct has more than 1,200. So my question would be is if you vote for this map today, you are voting for a map that does not satisfy the statutory requirement. And thus I would suggest by the logic of what you have read to us, anybody who votes yes could be prosecuted for a Class A misdemeanor.
Well, I think that the important part of 11-2 is to the extent practicable, as near as may be practicable. I think due to the unusual circumstances involved, the delay in the census, the delay in the approval of the legislative boundaries, given only 2 weeks to complete this process, in essence, after the legislative district maps were finalized, I think we would certainly make the argument that we're doing the setting of the boundaries to the extent practicable.
Does not the word practicable also appear in the sentence that talks about situating within a single congressional, legislative, and representative district?
It does.
So why does that not mean the same thing as practicable as you've argued in the other context? I mean, does it mean something different when you're talking about that? If it's not practicable to do everything, maybe it's not practicable to do it to have the districts match. I don't understand the distinction.
I think we've shown, because we did come up with a map, that it is practicable to do at least what is in Exhibit A and Exhibit B. I would have a hard time making an argument into court that it was not practicable because we have documentary evidence that indeed A and B are practicable.
Was that not the result?
Excuse me, Mr. How many more questions would you like to question?
Well, I don't know. I thought I was done, but I got, sorry, excuse my phone ringing. But is it not true that there was a conscious choice to do the legislative district part first, as opposed to the 1,200 part first? And if you had done them in reverse order, you would be arguing that we did the 1,200 and we didn't finish the others because it wasn't practicable. So it seems to me that the practicability arises from a conscious choice about what order it was decided to proceed.
Madam Chair.
I think that's a hypothetical question. And yes, Mr. Dugan would like to respond to that.
And Ms.
Thank you, Mr.
Farag, if I
Shepro.
can also be recognized after this. It's Jamie Mosser.
Thank you, Ms. Mosser, absolutely.
Thank you.
The practicability of the division, remember and we've commented on this several times, except with respect to the precinct committeemen, precincts are not election districts. So the provisions of the Civil Rights Act and the Equal Protection are not applicable in that context. However, we already have 500 ballot styles in Kane County within our 320,000 voters. So if we did not reconcile the legislative districts first, we would have had many more ballot styles, and it could almost multiply into an unmanageable process. So right now, 500 ballot styles is a real challenge to manage. We are doing it. but that process is greatly simplified by approaching the legislative district first within the hierarchy of precinct divisions.
Thank you. Ms. Mosser.
Thank you, Chairman. The other thing that I think is being conflated here, unfortunately, is how the law was written, and ASA Neerman spoke about this. There are two things that we're talking about. One is making sure that the borders don't go over the legislative or county board. And the other part is making sure that we have as close to 1,200 registered voters. The law that was passed, which is 5/11-2, specifically said that after this decennial, this one in 2021 that we have just had, we had to change the boundaries of the election precincts within 60 days of the passage of that statute. Today is that final day. There is language in there that says that we can further change the any precincts that are over 1,200 or to get them to it at a later board meeting. So what we've done now is we've complied with 5/11-2 in the best and most efficient way we possibly can. We tried to deal with all of those precincts that weren't at the 1,200, understanding that the priority was to do the one thing that we are allowed to do right now, which is to make sure that the boundaries aren't overlapping in any of these other areas. I do not believe that anyone could be prosecuted, as Mr. Shepro said, for following this proposal that's been given, because the data that's behind it, the work that's been put into it, has followed exactly what the law requires us to do. Thank you.
Hold on, Ms. Bates. Mr. Sturgis is next.
Just a couple of statements, I guess. I am so uncomfortable with this word practicable, and maybe the attorneys and my colleagues that are in the law profession understand that word. That's not a word that's in my normal vocabulary. So I'm not really understanding the limitations and implications of that word. It's a little bit uncomfortable. It seems to me like we have complied in so many ways on this to try and honor the letter of the law. My problem is, and as with most of the things I do, I try and put those in writing, and I did respond to you and Mr. Tepe in writing after receiving something from Mr. Aguilar in writing, after receiving in writing from other constituents and precinct committeemen. But their concern is just, hey, Cliff, I'm no longer, my precinct is no longer mine. I don't live there. It's moved over. I don't have a relationship with anybody there. What happens to me? I can't rerun for my precinct. The precinct has changed. It's a different precinct. And I quite honestly, I don't have an answer for that person. I don't know where this is going. I don't know what the thought process was, other than to tell those individuals. And there are a list of individuals that, don't worry, we'll figure it out. But for right now, it is a little convoluted. We're just trying to find our way through this, and we will continue to refine as we go along. And again, this nice lady from Geneva, who I don't know you from Adam, but came right up and said, but you've districted me out, if you will. I guess my only response is correct. You've been districted out, and I don't know what to do with that. And that's where I'm uncomfortable, because I don't have an educated response to that precinct committee person or that constituent. I don't know what to tell them. I don't know where to go. I don't have a logic. I don't have reasoning. And so while I understand we've given it the old college try to comply within the practicality of this, my question is, okay, let's just continue to give it the old college try. And if we stretch this a little bit, could we get those precinct committee people and into where they are now? And if we can't, then we just identify that and say it just can't be done. We need to figure out a workaround for that, which I don't have a clue with. And then my final thing, Mr. Dugan, I'm just lost a little bit, and I hate making comments or asking questions that I don't already know the answer to. But I'm going to go out on a limb on this because I'm clueless. But Gilbert's is part of that Pingree Grove growth explosion. And in the areas that I represent, being Gilbert's, East Dundee, West Dundee, Sleepy Hollow, blah, blah, blah. Gilbert's has now exploded. We used to be 562 people when I moved here. We're now just under 9,000 people. But our voting size at the Eagles Club, we don't have any more machines. We don't have any more people out there. Actually, the lines are shorter and less because of all the different voting methods. So when we say there's a one-to-one correlation in terms of cost, I'm kind of looking at you saying, I don't buy that. I don't think there's an inflated cost on that, but that's only because I haven't seen it in my little pigeonhole of the world. And I'm just trying to understand when I see a figure thrown out, it'll be $2.1 million more to do this. I kind of say, no, I don't see the math on that. And I'm just struggling with that. And we don't need to bring that up. We can talk offline later.
Okay, fine.
And seriously, if somebody could just help me understand that, because my Eagles Club isn't any bigger. The number of machines that there aren't any greater. My population is quadrupled time and time again. So
Let's just a very short answer to that. If the county board decided to divide your precinct into 2 precincts, you'd have to have another polling place, or at least another poll book for the precinct at a shared polling place.
Which I'm assuming Rutland now has.
And then each precinct would have to have a minimum of 3 election judges. They'd have to be trained, so they'd have to be paid for training sessions. So each precinct, if you had the equipment necessary, it's $25,000 per precinct. So multiplying the precinct unnecessarily, we think is not practicable. As a lawyer, I think if we have because of all the other alternatives for voting, because of the early voting, because of the vote centers, because of the vote by mail, because of we still even have absentee overseas ballots, because of all these other alternative methods of voting, we don't get the crush of 1,200 people at a precinct on election day.
And I appreciate that. And I appreciate everything that Roger and Vern and Madam Chair have done to get this together. And I appreciate Jamie saying, and Michelle, that we're within the tolerance or the spirit of what the legislation that was passed. But Madam from Geneva, and for my precinct people in my area, I still can't answer your question. I don't know what to tell you tomorrow or this afternoon when all those phone calls come in and they say, I've been disenfranchised. I don't know what to tell them. Honestly, the rubber meets the road right there. And I look like an ass. I don't have a clue what to say.
We cannot, I'm sorry,
Madam Chair,
can't respond to you. Yes, Mr. Wallace.
if I may,
Name, please.
sorry, Wallace.
Wait a minute, hold
I'm
on.
on the stack.
Okay.
Correct. Ms. Bates.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. I would like to speak to Mr. Martin first. I feel like you are not being told to vote for this map. You are being asked kindly. Please vote for this map. I think we can do better than doing nothing. I think postponing this just will put everything into a limbo. I believe that the intention of lining up the precincts with the other districts, especially the townships, and of splitting these very large districts is definitely in the spirit of the law. It can provide better access to voting for people. And I hope that very soon we will call the question.
Thank you. Mr. Wallace.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Wallace, Mr. Surgis actually said a lot of the things I was going to say. So, but I do have a couple of questions. One of the things in the in the statute with that, which I have pulled up here.
Mike, please.
Am I on? Can you hear me?
That's better.
Oh, sorry.
There you go.
Wasn't close enough. One of the things mentioned in the statute is regarding splitting precincts among county board districts. How many incidents of that are there with the new county board district map?
So the existing splits within the precinct, so you're talking about a precinct that would have 2 county board districts.
Correct.
There are a handful of those where it was not practicable to do. And I would say that those are, in maybe this single or double digit affecting voters. Those were usually spaces where a number of districts overlap. And in order to get a precinct to represent one district at a time, we would have had a precinct that was, well under 100 people in it. So that's not practical because we need to have the size, manageable, close to 1,200. So we would combine them with an adjacent precinct and then have a split for the ballot style.
Understood.
So that there are a number of those, and I believe we could get you a count exactly.
Okay, all right. No, that's fine. I just, I know that occurs. There are two instances of that just in the district that I represent.
Yes.
So I was curious about how widespread that is. The other comment that I will make, I agree with members of the public from Geneva Township and their concerns about combining the precincts. And I looked at one of the other townships and saw several other instances where the precincts were being combined and effectively, in a way, disenfranchising precinct committeemen who have been representing certain precincts and now no longer have a precinct to represent, or are going to be having to run against another precinct committeeman as a result of combining. In my overall reading of the statute, my reading is that the purpose of the statute is to divide large precincts, not necessarily to combine precincts to create larger ones. I don't agree with the statements made by the representative from the clerk's office regarding the cost of creating more precincts. I don't, it doesn't make logical sense. I have voted for many years outside of my own precinct of St. Charles 9 in St. Charles 5, along with, I think, 4 or 5 other precincts. And there, it is one voting station. There is not a multiplication of cost for running that polling station. So I don't think that holds water. I would be in agreement. I would be supportive of a resolution that took care of the issues that were taken care of in Exhibit B. I think those are very important. And that split the large precincts, but combining the precincts, I think, is causing a lot of issues that we're only just now realizing. And I think that will have a profound effect as we go into this next election season.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
This is Roger Fonstock again. I wanted to go back to the 3 parts of what our work was briefly. When you look at this, you'll see I typed it in the numbers that are above 1,600, the numbers that are above 1,200. One of the points of discussion every time we met was how far can you go based on the time constraints that you have. And the other part of that is that you have to get all of this approved. And then after you do this, it has to all be put back into the voter registration system and the clerk's office. So if you were to go further and not meet your deadline, you obviously would have to schedule this work for after the deadline, which that's a ramification that, is probably yet to be determined. But if you went further and started changing more, it also results in a further delay in having voter registration back up and running in the clerk's office. So if you're splitting, let's say you go down to the 102, you'd have 102 logical splits addition to what we already did to also configure in the election management system with information. And that's where the practicable part comes in, because we're already under the deadlines for petitions, for early voting, for the ballots. We are looking at from the time that the board adopts this to the time that it's available to the clerk, we will be spending 2 to 4 weeks. The clerk will need another 2, maybe 4 weeks to make all of this information, fully available. It'll start coming available in about 2 weeks, but to proof and validate, making sure that we're doing everything correctly, it's going to take 4 to 6 weeks. It's not going to be instant. Now, going back to Exhibit B, if you don't do the alignment of the precincts to the townships, I'm going to tell you that the work in configuring the voter system we have to fix 105 of those manually then and make those work. So it adds more time. So if we, to me, Exhibit B is really critical because it will eliminate probably 2 weeks of work before the early voting kicks in. So that 2 weeks is important.
Which
The other
again
part
is
is if
what
you try to
much-
do the 102, I think, we would be sometime next year, maybe especially, when you consider there's 291 precincts with precinct committeemen, is it over 500? I don't know how many people we would have to interview and meet with, it is just a really large task and we had a week, so.
Madam Chair, if I could just briefly speak. Assistant State Attorney Dawn Troost.
Yes, Dawn, please.
I think what also needs to be kept in mind is if small precincts are not combined, we cannot, or you cannot do that for another 10 years. All you can do in the interim is divide. So if the larger precincts are addressed and divided in the coming years, as our office has recommended to comply with the statute, you could end up with well over, you would have all these very small precincts, which would greatly increase the number of precincts in the county unnecessarily. And the goal of 1,200 is not only for precincts that are too large, but also for the precincts that are small. One thing that some of you may not know is when the election code was changed in November, it used to be that when you had 500 precincts or 500 voters in a precinct, or that was the goal. So when it reached 800, you had to try to reduce that. That's why we currently have some of these small precincts. The law was changed in November to require the threshold be 1,200. That is the goal that you are supposed to attempt to attain as near as may be practicable. So you have these small precincts that was under the election code prior to November, and now that's changed. So there would have, regardless, as the statute stands, and because of the numerical changes, it is inevitable that some precincts are going to be joined, and you are going to essentially have 2 precinct committeemen in one precinct. So
what if this legislation had not gone through, for clarification, you're saying that each precinct, according to the old legislation, was it when it reaches beyond 500 registered
sorry.
voters?
800.
Or was it 800?
that was for the redistricting, but I'm just saying based on the numerical changes and everything, and that yes, these precincts, inevitably there are going to be sometimes 2 committeemen in now 1 precinct.
By the change. All right, I think we've had a lengthy conversation
Madam Chair,
and a very
Shepro.
thoughtful. Mr. Shepro, please, we're ready to call the vote. I've been asked to call the vote
Well,
by
I was
now
not
2 board
given
members.
I was given a chance to ask some questions. I was not given a chance to comment.
All right, you may comment, please.
Okay, I will try to be brief because I know how to count too. All right, to Mr. Martin's point, John, the statute says, and I find it amusing, it says if the county board for any reason fails in any year to redivide or readjust the election districts, then the districts or precincts as then existing shall continue until the next regular June meeting, at which June meeting, the county board shall redivide or adjust the election districts. So if you don't do it, the penalty is you have to do it the next year. And if the next year you don't do it, I guess you have to do it the next year. There is no penalty prescribed. The comment was made earlier that it sounded like one of the principal driving forces was economics. It's too expensive. You know, every year we get state mandates from Springfield. Sometimes it's criminal justice, sometimes it's transit, but we cannot say to Springfield, we're not going to follow your mandate because we don't have the money. We have to figure out how to comply with it if it is actually a mandate. And since there is no penalty prescribed, and I really am disappointed that the board is being scared with the possibility of a criminal prosecution under a section of the code that's never been applied to this. I just find that very disappointing. The cost, I think, has already been commented on. That argument was raised 10 years ago by the clerk's office. It was demonstrated at that time that number is simply way exaggerated and nothing like what is suggested to be. I could go on. I think we've all heard my arguments the other day. I will vote no on this, and I encourage anybody who believes that practicable doesn't mean you must do it when there's no penalty prescribed. I hope you will join with us. Thank you.
Thank you for your brevity. Are we ready to call the vote?
Madam Chair, this is Ms. Strathman.
Oh, yes, Ms. Strathman.
I have just one quick comment, and that is in Elgin, like I assume happens in many cities, there's a group of people who are active in many ways in a community. And sometimes those people live in neighborhoods. In Elgin, we have a few precincts that have more than one precinct committee person who resides in a neighborhood. And by voting today, we are not telling people that they cannot be involved. We are not telling them we don't want you involved or you cannot be involved. What we're saying to them is maybe you need to be appointed to another precinct. And we have done that in Elgin for a while. It's not ideal. People like to walk and work in the neighborhood that they live in, but it is a way that we can work around this with these unusual circumstances that we're faced with in this whole process today. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you. And with that, I'd like to call the vote, please. It's been requested by several board members. Before we do that, Clerk, could you please read what we're voting upon?
Well, as I understand it, from Mr. Tepe, he made the amendment to 22-36 to allow for the incorporation of the changes for the alignment, of precincts lines to the township lines?
Yes,
think
the
so that-
amendment needs to be voted on first. That's
Correct.
correct.
Which is Exhibit B
Which is, okay, which is.
in the
Exhibit B.
ordinance,
Okay, so
the
this is
corresponding
the
ordinance.
amendment to the ordinance. Clerk, please call the roll.
Okay. Allen,
Allen, aye.
Bates,
Bates, aye.
Berman,
Berman, yes.
Mr. Brown, did you arrive? Davis, did you arrive? Ford,
Ford, yes.
Fraz,
Raz, yes.
Gums,
Gums, yes.
Iqbal,
Iqbal, yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Caius,
Caius, yes.
Kopi,
Kopi, no.
Leonard,
Leonard, yes.
Lewis,
Lewis, yes.
Martin,
Martin, yes.
Molina,
Molina, yes.
Sanchez,
Sanchez, yes.
Shepro,
Shepro, yes.
Silva,
Silva, yes.
Strathman,
Strathman, yes.
Burgess,
Sturgis, yes.
Tepe,
Tepe, yes.
Wallace,
Yes.
and Winnicki.
Yes.
Okay, that passes.
Okay, so now, may I think we're ready to call the question. And can you review what we're voting upon, please?
Okay, we're going to be voting on, as I understand it, ordinance 22-36, incorporating the amendment that you just
As
voted on.
amended, as amended.
As amended.
As amended, okay? Here we go. Ellen,
Ellen, aye.
Bates,
Bates, aye.
Berman,
Berman, yes.
Brown, Davis, Ford,
Ford, yes.
Raz,
Raz, yes.
Gums,
Gums, yes.
Iqbal,
Iqbal, yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Caius,
Caius, yes.
Kopi,
Gopi, no.
Leonard,
Leonard, yes.
Lewis,
Lewis, yes.
Martin,
Martin, yes.
Molina.
Molina, yes.
Excuse me. Sanchez,
Sanchez, yes.
Shepro,
Shepro, no.
Silva,
Silva, yes.
Strathman,
Strathman, yes.
Sturgis,
Sturgis, no.
Pepe,
Tepe, yes.
Wallace,
No.
and Winnicky.
Yes.
That passes.
Chances.
4 nays.
4 nays. Congratulations. Very thoughtful and very challenging for many of you, but your conversation was robust, important, and meaningful. I believe we have no need for executive session. May I have a motion?
Kenyon.
Mr. Kenyon.
That we adjourn and join the rest of the population. Unanimous decision. Second.
And Mr. Berman, I believe seconds. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Is there any opposed?
Thank you for your patience.